Good morning, Professor Morris. Wonderful to see you.
Good morning. Let me get my screen back. If I can figure it out.
You get your screen back and I'll continue to say hello.
Good morning.
Giving us some of your time to do this. This will be an exciting presentation, one I've been looking for. For our audience, this is the third presentation in honor of Black History Month, put together by the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce, and in particular headed by Kaylin George, who is sitting right here next to me in the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce conference room. The Chamber is an organization made up of business people, professional people, and education leaders from throughout West Virginia. Our members employ over half of West Virginia's workforce. Members are found in every county and community in West Virginia, and we are our state's largest and most active general business advocacy organization. We're pleased to have a nice turnout from our membership this morning to hear Professor Morris. So without further ado, let me move to an introduction of Professor Morris. He's going to talk to us a whole lot about Carter G. Woodson and some other topics that are near to his heart and around which he has expertise. But I'd like to begin by saying that Professor Morris joined the faculty at Marshall University in 2003 as the Carter G. Woodson Professor of Journalism and Mass Communications. He holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Mississippi and a graduate degree from the University of Dayton. He is an accomplished author. He wrote the book, Carter G. Woodson, History, the Black Press, and Public Relations. He and Dr. Alan Gould co-founded the Carter G. Woodson Lyceum, which is a program that was created through the Drinko Academy and the School of Journalism and Mass Communications. And he now serves as its director. He is continuing to be engaged in addition in research involving Carter Woodson's broader influence over Black lives during the 20th century. Has been named a John Marshall Summer Scholar. He has accepted an invitation to share his Woodson findings in a public history project for an upcoming Amherst University Press peer-reviewed publication. He has been awarded major grants from the West Virginia Humanities Foundation, and he remains involved in various volunteer activities. Now, there is a lot more to his bio that I could get into, but I'm so excited to hear him talk about his experiences and about Carter G. Woodson that with that introduction, I'd like to turn the program over to Professor Morris and ask you to take us on a little journey. So thank you so much again for doing this.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be able to make a presentation before the West Virginia Chamber. And I look forward to your questions when I'm done. This is a short presentation because we don't want to string it out and bore the audience. So this is a short version of what I often present about Woodson and Black History Month. First, I'll give you an overview of why we need Black History Month, what Woodson confronted, and then I will discuss the theme that we're using this year for Black History Month, Black contributions in American life and history. And I have a speech that Woodson gave in 1938 on NBC radio, a national audience, in which he discussed the contributions of African Americans throughout history, African people of African descent, rather. We haven't had African Americans throughout history, but they've been here a long time. So I'm calling this Black Contributions in History, Evolution of History Month and the Life and Work of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Why we need History Month, or even History Year that Woodson really wanted. Well, Blacks were removed from most history books. And part of it helped people explain slavery. They were portrayed as less than human and having made few contributions. All of that was erroneous, but we did have some unscrupulous historians buying into that. And many of us attended school seeing very little about what African Americans contributed in history. I have friends of several races who apologize for knowing very little about Black history. And I always say, don't apologize. There's a reason why you don't know. It's not because you didn't want to learn. It wasn't there for you to learn. And so part of what I'm doing now is to help people understand what they missed and give them a second chance to learn what they should have learned the first time. Segregation played a major part in keeping groups from learning about Black history. Woodson even said that segregation is the next step to extermination. Even Booker T. Washington feared that Blacks were headed toward another version of slavery. And the first time Woodson heard Booker T. Washington speak in 1903, Woodson said that Booker T. made this statement: "Little did I think at that time that I would live long enough to see myself in this veritable hell." This was just a few short years after slavery, and the future of African Americans was quite unclear. Woodson wanted to elevate the status of African Americans equal to other races, and but part of the problem was lynching of Blacks in America. And Woodson and the NAACP in the 1920s said that 2,500 African Americans had been lynched from 1885 to 1900 or so, early 20th century. And this obviously was a major problem in the history of African Americans. Woodson's prescription for the lynching problem was education. He said there would be no lynching if people were properly educated. And his program to improve the education of Blacks and all other Americans began with his creation of a scholarly journal that reported the historical facts about African Americans, and he created a magazine for students to learn about African American history. There were a few book publishing companies and academic journals that accepted the works of African American scholars. So Woodson created his own journal, and he created his own publishing company. And with that, he made major strides in unlocking the knowledge of what the world knew about people of African descent and African Americans, and making contributions to society. I would like to play for read to you an excerpt from a 12-minute speech that Woodson gave in 1938 on NBC radio. As far as I know, this is the only time he spoke to a national audience. And so I transcribed it, and I'll read it read this excerpt to you. Okay. First, I'd like to explain that when Woodson speaks of Negroes, he's actually speaking of Africans and people of African descent, which would include African Americans and people descended from Africa around the world. Woodson, in this speech, first explains the purpose of the association he founded in 1915. That association then was called the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Today is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. With the founding of that association, Woodson started what we now call the modern Black history movement. And because there's so much interest in what he created, you can still see that people are following the Black history movement. We see evidence of that all the time. But let me begin with what Woodson said in 1938. The purpose of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History is to collect the records of the Negro and to treat them scientifically in order that the race may not be a negligible factor in the thought of the world. The past of the Negro race has been so obscured and belittled by propagandists that little is known of the creditable record of the race. Today, as a rule, we take notice only of the undesirable Negroes and ignore those who are struggling to climb upward. To turn the attention of the public in the more desirable direction, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History was organized in Chicago, September 9, 1915. This society publishes magazines, researches in Negro history, directs studies in clubs and schools, promotes the home study of the Negro by mail, produces texts on the Negro for schools and colleges, collects and preserves the valuable documents of Negro history, supplies libraries with special collections of rare books on the Negro, and educates promising and enterprising young men for service in historical research. The Association for the Study of Negro Life and History finds by scientific investigation that the record of the Negro is not to be despised. Even in Africa, the Negro race has achieved much for which it has not been given credit. There are historians and anthropologists who say that the Africans first discovered the use of iron, first domesticated the sheep, the goat, and the cow, and first stimulated Europe to fine art. Some have found in Africa what they have considered the first evidences of trial by jury. It is generally conceded that when Europeans first began to penetrate Africa during the 15th and 16th centuries, they found the natives as far advanced in their political and social organization as the Europeans themselves were in the 9th and 10th centuries. This the Africans had accomplished with little or no help from Asia or Europe. Evidence of the progress was found in the well-organized African kingdoms and empires like Ghana, Congo, Ashanti, and Uganda. The antiques of works of art at Benin and the imposing ruins of Zimbabwe show not only the aesthetic bent of these people, but the grandeur which that nation or those nations attain in both political and social organization. Brought to Europe, the Negro even there demonstrated his capacity in spite of handicaps. Examples of contributions in Europe, well, General Dumas, the head of the great literary dynasty of France, won laurels as a soldier in the defense of that land. Abram Hannibal, the great grandfather of Alexander Pushkin, became one of the builders of modern Russia. Later, when the European explorers came to America, the Negro came to play his part. In the discovery of the Pacific Ocean, Balboa carried with him 30 Negroes. In the conquest of Mexico, Cortez was accompanied by a Negro who, finding in his allowance of rice some grains of wheat, he planted them as an experiment, and then made himself the pioneer in wheat raising in the Western Hemisphere. Negroes assisted in the exploration of Guatemala and conquest of Chile, Peru, and Venezuela. The first important contribution of the Negro in America was first as indentured servants, and then debased to the claim as slaves. Negroes supplied the demand for labor on the plantation. They cleared the forests of our Southland, drained the swamps, prepared the soil for the production of its staple, and dug from the earth nuggets of precious metals. In that section, the South, appeared Negro mechanics and artisans using the skill which they had developed in Africa. These Negro workers charred horses, made vehicles, constructed boats, and built railroads, which serve now as a network of transportation facilities for that section. Negroes showed inventive genius in producing labor-saving devices. Negroes assisted Eli Whitney in his experiments with the cotton gin, and McCormick with the reaper. Granville T. Woods stimulated industry with his electrical appliances. Elijah McCoy brought machinery nearer perfection with his lubricating devices. And John Matzeliger revolutionized the shoe industry with the lasting machine, which enabled the world to make shoes by a machinery rather than by hand. While helping to develop the country, Negroes have done their part in defending it. As soldiers, Negroes acquitted themselves with honor in all American wars. Negroes served with the colonial forces on land and sea and helped to shape the destiny of America. Brave men of African blood followed the British standard during the 7 Years' War. Crispus Attucks fell in the Boston Massacre in 1770 and then immortalized himself among the first to sacrifice their lives for the independence of this country. In 1775, Salem Corps showed such powers in the Battle of Charlestown that 14 white officers reported him to Congress as having behaved like an experienced officer as well as an excellent surgeon. Austin Dabney distinguished himself for bravery in many skirmishes with the British and Tories in Georgia, when it was thought that the cause of the Patriots in that section might be lost. More than 3,000 other soldiers of this type served in the American Revolution and helped to make the independence of this country possible. Negroes stood out with equal valor in the War of 1812. Men of color came to Andrew Jackson's rescue in the Battle of New Orleans in 1814, and by that bravery elicited from him the highest praise possible. In the Civil War, the Negro soldiers gave still better accounts of themselves. They were the natural targets for the approaching forces who gave no quarter to Negroes. But 178,000 of these donned the uniform and decidedly assisted in destroying the morale of the enemies of freedom. In subsequent wars, the bravery of the Negroes furnished some of the more satisfying incidents. Their fighting at Santiago in the Spanish-American War was all but wonderful. In the expedition under General Pershing, members of the 10th Cavalry and the 24th Infantry fought with great bravery and acquitted themselves with unusual honor. And in the World War, here he's talking about World War I, we find that the Negro soldiers abroad so distinguished themselves as to merit the praise of the Secretary of War. Thus, while making a contribution in this field, the Negro has made a contribution also in the intellectual and the spiritual spheres. In oratory in behalf of a great cause, no spokesman of this on this side of the Atlantic have expressed themselves more eloquently than Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. We have given the world poets right for the screenplay. Paul Laurence Dunbar, James Weldon Johnson, County Cullen, and Langston Hughes. In painting and sculpture, we have risen to a high level with the productions of Edmona Lewis, E.M. Bannister, Henry O. Tanner, Archibald Motley, William Edward Scott, J.L. Wells, and Aaron Douglas. With music, we have returned the soul of this unwilling world and melodies rolling from the lips of Roland Hayes, Marian Anderson. On the stage, we have attained distinction with Ira Aldridge, Charles Gilpin, Richard B. Harrison, and Paul Robeson. With the cooperation of friends of humanity, the race will be inspired to accomplish more. Thank you. And now I am ready to answer any questions.
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking you and thank you for the overview about Carter G. Woodson. I wonder if I could ask what you know about his early life. I know he was born into a family that had previously been enslaved, and he came to West Virginia to work in the coal mines, and from there he made his way to Barnett or to Douglas High School in Huntington. Could you help fill in any of the gaps that I might have?
You did a very good job. Yeah, Woodson's father first came to what became Huntington in about 1870 with Collis P. Huntington. There were several former slaves who accompanied him in completing the railroad in Huntington. And James H. Woodson, the father, stayed on for several years to help build what became Huntington. The living standards were not very good for early Huntington. So in the early 1870s, they moved back to Virginia. And Carter G. Woodson was born there in 1875. In the early 1890s, the family moved back to Huntington. They had heard that it was a land of opportunity. One of Woodson's brothers had been here and reported back to the family that it was a great place to live. And so they moved back here. And Woodson and one of his brothers worked in the coal mines before he attended high school here. From the age of about 13, he was working in the coal fields. But at the age of 19, after his family had moved here, the family had been here for several years, Huntington had just built Booker T. Frederick Douglass School, one of the few places in the South that had high schools for African Americans. And so in 1896, for 1 year, Woodson attended school. I guess he was so smart that he only needed 1 year to complete his high school education. He got his diploma at the end of that 1 year. And within 4 years, he was the principal of that school. But even today, the principal, the mayor of Huntington credits Woodson's father as helping build what became Huntington. Unfortunately, we have no photographs of his father. Otherwise, I would love to see James Woodson's photograph downtown Huntington, like so many other African Americans whose pictures are being placed around town this month.
So much, Professor Morris. We do have a few people raising their hands, some participants, and I'd just like to remind them, please submit your questions in the Q&A part, and we will do our best to get to all these questions. But while people might be typing, I'd like to know a little bit more about the Carter G. Woodson Lyceum and what resources are available for West Virginians who would like to know more.
Well, great question. I love answering that question. I became more interested in Woodson. You know, I had been here for several years when I became a Drinko Fellow. And the Drinko Fellows have to have a research project. And I chose Woodson, of course. And we began to emphasize Woodson's contributions to Black History Month more so than ever during that period. And at about 2016, Alan Gould and I came to the same conclusion that we needed an institute to emphasize Woodson. And Alan came up with the name the Lyceum to also honor Aristotle. Aristotle's first school was called a Lyceum in 335 BC. And I was delighted because I am an Ole Miss graduate, and the original school of higher education in Mississippi is at Ole Miss, and the is called an administration building now, but it was the original university in 1848, and it is the Lyceum. And Alan said, "Oh, that's great," and he said, "Alan," he said, Aristotle also had a grove outside his Lyceum. I said, "Oh, that's terrific too. So does Ole Miss." And I said, "But we have one problem. Our new president, who was then Dr. Gilbert, just arrived from Mississippi State. And he was also a graduate of Mississippi State. I said, we could have a problem there." But it turns out Dr. Gilbert thought the whole thing was funny. And he was one of our biggest supporters of the Lyceum. And so we used the Lyceum to provide our region, Marshall, and the entire tri-state region programs on Black history and a deeper understanding of Woodson's contributions to West Virginia history and Huntington history. We have a poster contest and an essay contest for students. But Woodson also wanted to teach Black history year-round. And so we have programs that are in months other than February, such as a Black History Teachers Institute in June. We will have our 5th one this June, and you will hear more about that when we begin to promote it in order to receive applications.
Thank you. We do have some questions in the chat, and this is a great follow-up question to what we just had discussed. The question is, how can we join and support the Lyceum?
That's the best question yet. We use the Maple Grove Society. I mentioned that Aristotle had a grove. Well, Ole Miss has a grove, and the one of their biggest fundraising classification is the Grove Society. Well, we named ours the Maple Grove Society. There are maple trees on the Marshall campus, And I went out with a scientist to make sure we still have the maple trees. But there was a grove at one point apparently. And so when I said maple grove, we do have a maple grove. And we asked people who want to support us to give us at least $100 a year. And we use that to defray the cost of putting on programs and inviting speakers each year. So thank you
so
for that
much.
question.
Thank
And
you.
you can go to our website and sign up to make a donation, or you could just send me a check to me at Marshall University.
Thank you. We have time for just one more question we have in the chat. And the question is, what efforts are being made to incorporate Black history in America and their contributions into public education? Or in your case, if you could speak to education at Marshall University.
Well, again, you guys have some softball questions. We work closely with the Cabell County School. We have great support from the Cabell County Board of Education and the superintendent, as well as the Marshall University administration. All of our presidents and deans and provosts have been supported. As I mentioned, we have the Summer Teachers Institute, and we don't charge the teachers to attend. We have grants. We've received grants over the years from the West Virginia Humanities Council, and we use that grant to pay the tuition and give a stipend to the teachers. With the contest for the Black History poster, we require the students who submit their works to state how to conduct research and state what they learned from their research in putting together the poster. We ask the teachers how learning more about Black history will help them in the classroom. So I think we are making great contributions, makes major strides in that area.
Professor Morris Kalin said that would be the last question, but I'm just chomping at the bit to ask one more, and I don't think we've exceeded our time by so much that I have to. Do you have, it's my understanding, I know Carter Woodson did not have children, or at least that's what I recall.
Right.
But it is my understanding that there are Woodson family members living in West Virginia, and when I was growing up, there were Barnett family members living in. Do you have contact with any of the people who would have been related to Carter Woodson?
Yes. In my book, I mentioned several of them. Nelson Bickley is one. His wife, Ancilla, at one time was the provost at West Virginia State University. And she's written articles about the Woodson family. There are several of his great nieces and nephews who occasionally attend our Woodson lectures. The Woodsons and the Barnetts, were one family.
Yes.
The Reverend Barnett moved here about the same time as Woodson's family did. And the Reverend Barnett married Woodson's aunt, James Woodson's sister. And the families were very close. In fact, the Reverend Barnett named his children very often, and Barnett's named the children the same as the Woodson family side. There's a Nelson Bickley from the Woodson side, and there is a Nelson Barnett from the Barnett side. Several of the Barnetts, a couple of them were physicians, and one was principal. Woodson got his job as principal in 1900 because his first cousin, Carter H. Barnett, was fired as the principal for running a slate of candidates against the school board and local officials in an election. He was editor of a local newspaper. But the families were united, and they made contributions to the community over time as well.
I'll add one editorial note because I grew up in Huntington, and as a child, I remember Callie Barnett, and Callie Barnett lived to be well over 100 years old, which is part of the reason that I think I remember her. But my father would, if we drove by her house and she was sitting on the porch, my dad would always point her out and say, "That's a very important person and somebody you should remember having seen." So I really,
they used to call her Miss Callie. Am I correct?
yes, Miss Callie Barnett.
Yeah, and she was the mother of Carter H. Barnett.
So anyway, that's just a nice memory that I have, and I appreciate the fact that my dad would sometimes go out of his way to point that out to his maybe 5 or 6 or 7-year-old son, so that I would have that memory.
Yeah, but now I mentioned the Bickleys. Nelson died a couple of years ago.
Yes.
But his widow is still alive. She lives in Richmond.
Well, this has been fascinating, and it seems like there's probably plenty to follow up on here. So thank you so much for this interesting history and this review of Carter G. Woodson and his contributions to Black history and African-American history.
Can I say one other thing?
Yes, please do. Please go right ahead.
You guys know Bill Bissett, don't you?
Yes.
Bill is a member of the Maple Grove Society. He joined when he was president of the chamber in Huntington.
Bill is a very good friend, and he may well be tuned into this broadcast today. He's a very, very good friend and a great asset to West Virginia, and we're glad that he's one of our friends. So thank you so much. We've checked the queue, and we have another comment that is not a question, it's a comment, and it says, "Thank you, this was wonderful." And I can't say it better than that. Thank you, this was wonderful.
Thank you all, and have a great day.
And next week we have Misha Poor coming. So Misha is a longtime friend, served in the legislature, and is a vice president at West Virginia University. And Misha will be speaking at this hour next Tuesday, and then that will conclude the series from the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce for Black History Month.
Now, do you have a recording of this?
Yes.
Can you send me a copy?
Will do. And the recording for everyone else who's on, if you would like to watch back and listen back to some of the conversation, this will be on wvchamber.com and also posted to our social media pages. So we will make sure to get this up right here in just a little bit. And again, we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.